So Albania's special courts against corruption were established as part of a separate structure for investigation, prosecution, and adjudication of corruption and organised crime. Now, this was created by a constitutional reform back in 2016. Now, the courts itself, colloquially known as SPAK in Albania, began operating in 2019. The architecture of SPAK and its various institutions was designed by teams of experts. International stakeholders were also involved, the EU, the US, and others from the region. Now, the operation of the SPAK courts is challenged by controversy over their jurisdiction. Also, members of the public, they don't always trust it. Those who end up in SPAK accuse it of being weaponized for political gain. But there are also issues with staff shortages as well. So it hasn't been plain sailing. I've decided today to speak to Ivan Gunic. Now, he is a legal practitioner and researcher at the Institute of Public International Law and Comparative Constitutional Law of the University of Zurich in Switzerland. Now, his expertise focuses on anti-corruption and justice reform. His research examines the emergence of judicial authorities in Europe, specializing in corruption cases. Now, he's also worked on institutional reform projects in Belarus, Bulgaria, Poland, Russia, and Serbia. And he has expertise on SPAK in Albania as well. Ivan, welcome to Inside Albania. Thank you for joining me today to share some of your expertise with us. We spoke before and, I talked a bit about the work that SPAK has been doing recently. They've been very busy. It seems to be a constant stream of politicians from both sides, both political parties, sort of going in for questioning, being charged, being detained, pending trial, being convicted. And this seems to have picked up quite recently. Is this the purpose of SPAK? Do you think Albania's justice system and its reforms are finally starting to bear some fruit?
I think it's certainly a good sign. In the end, what the anti-corruption court and an anti-corruption system are supposed to do is process cases. So certainly that is a positive sign.
Mm-hmm. I think people are just a bit surprised by how many people are sort of ending up going there. And people, everyone who gets accused or hauled in front of SPAK, they've been saying, I'm innocent. It's being politicized. The government or this one or that one is using SPAK to get to me. But I want to understand from your point of view, your expertise, are there safeguards in place with a structure such as SPAK to protect from this sort of weaponization? How can we reassure people that there is limited political interference, if that is in fact the case?
So to start with, SPAK is a system which consists of two separate courts with a specialized prosecutor and the National Bureau of Investigation. Their mandate is to fight corruption, organized crime, and crimes committed by high-level officials. And there are certainly precautions to shield their integrity. For example, there's a higher salary, personal security, people are harder to dismiss, they need more experience, and there's also more accountability. What I think is also important to know about SPAK is these people went through a re-evaluation process, which is actually true for all judges and prosecutors in Albania. And they went through an asset check, background check, and qualification check. This transitional process was also monitored by international actors. And what I think is important to keep in mind here is that this is a bigger picture. SPAK is part of a bigger reform. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned whether the institution has been weaponized. So meaning whether there is a use of legal institutions to damage a political opponent. This is what we usually mean in academia when we talk about lawfare or weaponization. Mm-hmm. I think it's important to keep in mind that there's also a different concept, namely anti-corruption crusades, which might also explain what you have in mind. This means the widespread efforts by courts, prosecutors, and investigators to try corruption cases. This is not necessarily illegitimate. While lawfare is a bad thing, an anti-corruption crusade is not necessarily a bad thing. This just means that you have a certain group dynamic among judges and prosecutors that reinforce their commitment to try corruption cases. And I think that might be something you see in Albania. I cannot judge from specific cases, but looking at this macro level, that's absolutely possible. And I think it's helpful to get away the perspective from this concept of lawfare and weaponization and concentrate on this crusade thing, which is not necessarily a good thing, but I think it helps us who are thinking about these problems.
So it could be, I mean, you're saying that the people who are in these institutions, working in the institutions, they are maybe the cream of the crop in some aspects because they have been thoroughly vetted. And based on that, it appears that they are responsible, reliable, credible, not likely to be corrupted. They have a higher salary, and I assume that is to take away any potential sort of interest in maybe accepting bribes or financial motivations to go a certain way or another. So those are the sort of safeguards put in place on that side. And then you have a situation whereby they are really keen to clean up the corruption and the sort of a momentum that's picked up. And there is probably a lot of corruption around. And that is what is perhaps creating this situation at the moment. Is that a fair summary?
I think so, yes. I cannot again, judge about specific cases, but it is something we see in other contexts. We see it in Latin America with the Carvash operation. We've seen it in the 90s in Italy. And obviously, you will see a lot of impact with it. And again, whether it's a good or a bad thing remains to be open in the end.
So it's not an Albanian phenomenon. It's not something that's only happening in Albania. You know, they've set up these institutions, they've done this reform, and suddenly all the politicians are getting locked up. This is something else I've heard, you know, well, this is an Albanian problem. So this is something which has sort of happened in similar ways in other countries, correct?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Now, I'm curious as well, among your sort of circle and your colleagues and other people with an interest in the situation in Albania and the reforms, as I mentioned, there have been a steady trickle of cases coming in and out of SPAK, but things have picked up momentum, I think, recently. What is the perception of the current situation among your colleagues and your peers with regards to this? Are they sort of like, oh, it's working, or maybe it's too much too soon? Can you share that with us? And you don't have to name names, of course.
So the international perception of SPAK in general is positive. We have the European Union, which commented on the work of SPAK. Freedom House, in general, people who are closer to the situation see it positive. But again, I think when we think about whether this is a good or bad thing, this institution just started 2019. So it is actually in operation for just about 5 years. And I'm not really sure whether you can already have a final judgment about their work. But again, they are doing the work, right?
Yes, it's happening.
What else should they do, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask as well, at the moment, SPAK, what are the sort of main challenges that they face? And now you are seeing sort of SPAK in action. Are you able to identify any flaws in the way that things are working that perhaps if had been known before could have been addressed? Is there anything that sort of stands out to you in this regard?
I think one of the biggest challenges was just finding the right amount of people, because again, the establishment of SPAK was part of a bigger justice reform. And through all that vetting and through this necessity of having enough expertise, you just had trouble finding enough people and staffing these institutions. I think this is a big learning of SPAK.
I see this could be an issue going forward as well, because, as you know, Albania suffers with demographic issues, brain drain, they call it. I don't like the term, but, you know, a lot of the younger people, the educated people, they're going abroad to study and not many are coming back. So I'm wondering who's going to staff an institution such as this with sort of a high level of expertise in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. Which leads me to my next question. How do you see SPAK evolving? Is it going to continue, do you think, in this sort of role, doing what it's doing now? Or, you know, I'm sure eventually everyone who's corrupt may be arrested or not, perhaps. Do you see its role evolving or changing as we go forward? What is next?
That's a very good question. And unfortunately, I have to say it depends. It depends on the reaction, on how the bigger system will react to these sort of prosecutions. And I think these are political actors, civil society, media. Everybody is important in this kind of process. So it is difficult to say. I wouldn't.
It's too early to tell.
Definite on it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And now, talking about the justice reform, you mentioned the staffing issues. Now, the justice reform, I mean, it took longer, the vetting process took longer than expected. And I can't remember the exact figure off the top of my head, but it was over half of those people vetted were either dismissed or resigned, which is a huge amount. My first question, is this a similar figure to other countries that have perhaps gone through similar processes? Do you know?
I'm not aware that any other country recently went through similar process. The only thing I can think of is Estonia, which went also to considerable justice reform in the 90s, which actually worked out pretty well.
Yes.
But I think this case is pretty unique in Europe, at least.
It's a really high number. But obviously, it threw the justice system into complete disarray, and we're still dealing with the consequences of it now. You know, there was the problem with the High Court, the Constitutional Court, not enough people there. And then obviously in the general justice system, I mean, the appeal court at the moment, I have a case I sent for appeal, not that I did something wrong, someone else did. I sent something for appeal and my lawyer said, we have absolutely no idea. This was 4 years ago and we're still waiting for even a date, you know. So there are still huge repercussions of this justice reform in Albania, particularly when it comes to staffing. Again, I want to ask, do you consider it a success in that respect? Were there things that could have been done differently? I guess people were maybe not expecting so many judges to be dismissed or resign throughout the process. Knowing what we know now, could anything have been done differently?
I think a very positive sign here is the process, right? You have two courts. You can appeal to the European Court of Human Rights. Individual cases, you have an international monitoring operation, which can issue recommendations on individual cases. And then I think this is generally a very strong indicator that the system was set up in a very good manner. But again, if you do justice reforms in general, like, Albania is not the only example here. You will run into difficulties. It was 800 people. Magistrates which had to go through it, and imagine any other legal system would have great difficulty dealing with losing 50% of the workforce, right? This is not, but it is, again, if you want to sort out the bad apples, which I think should be the goal, this is encouraging, certainly.
Yes. The case that I had one judge and then they were dismissed. And then the next judge I was assigned, they resigned. And it was just a nightmare. I mean, my case was very small, but it has caused huge problems for people locally. Do you think it's really going to have an impact on politics, this? And also, we have elections in 6 months in Albania. And I know you can't talk about specific cases, but it seems that everyone is being rounded up at some point and sent into SPAK. But this poses another issue for democracy as well, because, OK, we have to weed out corruption, of course, but there's no opposition at the moment because they're behind bars, most of them, or facing court cases. And then we have this election coming and there's no opposition. I mean, this is another issue for democracy as well. Do you have any view on this sort of process, this issue?
I think we have to ask ourselves, what is the alternative, right? But obviously there will be problems if you have such massive investigations. And what you can expect certainly is that it will have consequences in politics. But honestly, to predict it, you would need a political scientist and not me, right?
I thought I'd ask just on the off chance. Now, I want to wrap up just by asking you a question. As I've mentioned during this interview, you know, people, they do trust SPAK. There is a high level of trust for SPAK, for the justice reform, for the EU and things like that as well. People generally believe in it. But there are people, and I think this is left over from how things used to be. You know, they don't completely trust the justice system. They don't completely trust judges. They don't completely trust their politicians. There's this constant fear of people interfering in the background. And I'm wondering, I mean, you have explained what safeguards are in place, but can you, as an expert, as someone with a good knowledge of SPAK, as someone with significant experience in justice reform in other countries, can you explain a bit for the people listening to reassure them about this process, to reassure them about SPAK?
And I think the most important thing is to first set up the right expectations. This institution cannot be a silver bullet. This is pretty much clear. But what you want to look at is specific outcomes. You want to look at individual trials. And this is, I think, a task of media, civil society, and also academia. But I also think, in general, that the public regards the institution as something positive is also a good sign. And then again, what I also want to emphasize is there was a lot of work being conducted on the institutions. We had Venice Commission, which is the Council of Europe, European Union. There was an involvement of the US. And I think it is important to keep in mind that there were many people behind this, and this is a group effort, right? And I think it is important that these institutions and these persons are behind it.
So it's not like it's the Albanian government running the show. This is something that has been created out of the expertise of many, many individuals from many organizations, many backgrounds who know what they're doing. It has that level of oversight as well, you know, because it's backed by the US and the EU. And for that reason, people should judge it on its results. And us as journalists should report on what's happening to keep people's trust. Yes?
Absolutely.
Ivan, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.